I wrote a Substack that got a lot of traction and I wanted to share it with you guys on my YouTube channel because apparently a lot of y'all didn't know what was going on with this, and it involves the IRS and our undocumented immigrants, and it's so particularly egregious what the Trump administration is doing that I thought it would be great to be able to share this information with you. So what happened was a federal judge just entered on November 21st, 2025, which is just on Friday, a order wherein it was blocking the IRS from doing a massive data share with the Department of Homeland Security and specifically ICE. And it spun out of an agreement that was entered in April of this year between the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and dog killer Kristi Noem, Secretary of our Department of Homeland Security. And that memorandum of understanding, or an MOU as it was called, basically said that ICE could ask the IRS for otherwise confidential information for undocumented immigrants that were filing and paying taxes to the federal government, and that the IRS would be obligated to turn over this information to ICE. Why? So that ICE could actually facilitate enforcement of convicted felon Donald Trump's absurd and draconian immigration policies. Now, this was all on the down low. Like, the reason why people didn't know about this is because no one knew about it. It was done secretly because, understandably, people would get pissed off. Why? Because there is a presumption of secrecy of your confidential information when you file your fucking taxes. If you have to file them, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that the IRS, except for very limited, narrow exceptions, is going to maintain your information confidentially. And yet, no. If you're an undocumented immigrant, even though the federal government's telling you you have to pay up and you have to pay into our federal system, and wait till you guys hear the numbers because you're going to shit yourself, what happens here? Well, the IRS is not only going to make you pay to be a law-abiding, not citizen of our country, but then they're going to use that information that is provided when you pay those taxes to be able to go after you, round you up, and deport your ass. We'll get into the specifics in a second, but let's turn to this order because it's very important and it kind of sets the table for what's going on. So this is a 94-page order, and it was entered by Federal District Court Judge Colleen Collar Catelli. It's kind of an interesting name, right? She's a senior judge. She's got senior judge status, meaning she's not retired, but she's sitting in senior judge status for the District of Columbia. And again, like I said, it was from Friday, November 21st. And this opinion is damning against the Trump administration, specifically the IRS. Because a whole bunch of plaintiffs, including a nonprofit organization, sued the IRS and other defendants saying, look, you used to have this long-standing privacy policy that protected confidential taxpayer information. And now you have this new policy that we're going to call the data policy. And what it does is it allows for large-scale interagency sharing of confidential taxpayer information. And as the opinion of the judge reflects, the IRS entered into an April 2025 agreement with ICE to share confidential taxpayer address information. And then subsequently on August 7th of 2025, the IRS disclosed to ICE the confidential address information of approximately 47,000 taxpayers. Now here's what's crazy. The IRS, doing such a great job at due diligence here, relied on a representation from ICE that a single individual at ICE was, quote, personally and directly engaged, end quote, in more than 1 million criminal investigations or proceedings. Needless to say, the judge was like, that's bullshit. Because it's not like one person at ICE is processing more than 1 million criminal investigations or proceedings. And there's a specific federal statute, 26 U.S. Code 6103, subsection I, subsection 2. That specific federal statute allows for the disclosure of certain information from the IRS to individuals that are, quote, personally and directly engaged in a non-tax criminal investigation or proceeding, assuming that several other conditions are satisfied. So, in other words, the IRS, trying to play fast and loose and cute with the federal law, received and relied upon a representation from ICE that was also playing fast and loose and cute with the law. When ICE said, oh yeah, there's one person, it's an individual at ICE, and they're handling more than 1 million criminal investigations or proceedings, so you can give us that confidential taxpayer address information for those 47,000 people. And the judge says, again, that that's bullshit. In this instance, the judge, in this 94-page opinion, states that the plaintiffs in this case have established a substantial likelihood that the IRS basically adopted and implemented this new data policy that allows for the disclosure of this confidential address information for tens of thousands of taxpayers to ICE. And that they knew that ICE is going to use the addresses for immigration-related criminal investigations and proceedings, even though ICE only identified one single employee at ICE who was processing these millions of criminal investigations or proceedings. The court also found that the plaintiffs showed that this data policy of sharing confidential taxpayer information was unlawful under the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA, which we've talked about here before, and that this address sharing policy was, quote, arbitrary and capricious, because the IRS never bothered to explain why it was deviating so greatly from its prior policy of otherwise keeping this information confidential and private. It was a strict confidentiality policy, and then suddenly the IRS is like, psych, we're not going to do that anymore. The plaintiffs also improved, according to this judge, that the IRS's disclosure of this confidential taxpayer address information to ICE was illegal because it didn't comply with the requirements of that federal statute that I just read to you, the IRS code, that specific subsection. And so the court entered this injunction to block the further data sharing to happen between the IRS and ICE, because the court's like, look, any further data sharing is going to be impermissibly used for civil immigration enforcement, which it's not supposed to do. And listen, it can't unring the bell because that 47,000 taxpayer information's already been sent out already in August, and we're sitting here in November, but it'll at least stop it from continuing to happen. And of course, I'm sure there's going to be an imminent appeal from the Trump administration because that's the only thing they're good for is appeals. So I wanted to actually highlight a little bit from this federal order a little bit more before we get into a little bit more of a discussion about the policy issues here, because the background of the IRS's traditional confidentiality policy and historically why it came to be is so freaking relevant to what's happening right now with this Trump administration. I just thought it was so worthwhile to share this with you. So check this out. We're on page 4 of this 94-page opinion. It says here, quote, "There was a time when taxpayer information was considered public record, the access to which was controlled by the executive branch. But all of that changed in 1976 when, in the wake of Watergate and White House efforts to harass those on its, quote, enemies list, Congress amended Section 6103 of the Internal Revenue Code through the Tax Reform Act of 1976, quote, to protect the privacy of tax return information and to regulate in minute detail the disclosure of this material. These amendments established the general rule that taxpayer returns and return information shall be confidential. Congress decided that taxpayer information was entitled to essentially the same degree of privacy as those private papers that are maintained in the home. The core promise of the voluntary tax system is as follows. If you come forward and file this highly personal information with the IRS will hold this information in confidence. And the IRS even represented this policy to the American public, as seen in one brochure that reads, quote, "The general rule, tax information is confidential." And yet, the IRS, helping ICE in furtherance of Trump's immigration enforcement, said, forget that, it's not confidential anymore. So if you're like me, your skin needs a little extra care this time of the year. I mean, between the colder weather and the rush of the holidays, it's easy for your skin to feel dry, dull, or stressed. So that's why I've been sticking with OneSkin. You know how much I love my OS1 face topical supplement. It's been amazing to add it to my daily routine to continue to deliver powerful skincare and longevity benefits that I cannot live without during this busy holiday season. Because, you know, at the core is their patented OS1 peptide, the first ingredient that's proven to target senescent cells. Those are the root cause of wrinkles, that crepiness maybe here, and the loss of elasticity, all of key signs of skin aging. And these results have now been validated in 5 different clinical studies. And what I really love is at the helm of this iconic skincare brand is their founding all-woman team of longevity scientists. They've got PhDs in stem cell biology, skin regeneration, and tissue engineering. And amazing at this time of the year, OneSkin has also just launched limited edition holiday sets, including nightly rewind gift sets, which adds the perfect touch of luxury to your gift list. It's the ultimate upgrade to any nightly ritual, featuring their best-selling face moisturizer, the one I use, their brand new peptide lip mask, and a sculpting gua sha tool. Each element is designed to work together as your body enters its natural nightly repair mode, helping renew skin at the cellular level for a stronger, smoother, and more youthful looking complexion. So for a limited time only, try OneSkin for 15% off using the following code, Phang, that's my last name, at oneskin.co/Phang, that's Phang. Now it's oneskin.co/Phang, Phang. Now, after you make this purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. So please support the Katie Phang News Channel and tell them that I sent you to them. Look, I cannot begin to underscore how wonderful my experience has been with OneSkin. I personally think that it's the type of product. I mean, it doesn't leave my skin greasy. It doesn't make me feel weird like layering it with my other products. It actually works impeccably well. I know you will not be disappointed. You really need to go to oneskin.co/Phang, Phang, for your limited time only, 15% off, especially this time of the year. I'm going to get it for my mom. I'm also going to get it for a lot of my friends. Some further evidence that the IRS, as a federal agency, is now trying to veer off into this no confidentiality system is the following. The IRS recently invested in a technical infrastructure that will facilitate rapid access to massive amounts of IRS data by hiring a federal contractor to build a single unified database of taxpayer information within the IRS that will permit automated access to all IRS taxpayer information by IRS employees in one interface, end quote. One massive, huge database maintained at the IRS for all IRS taxpayer information so that anyone in the administration is able to access it. It's pretty violative, huh? Think about that for a second. Furthermore, in April of this year, 2025, a whistleblower reported to Congress that the IRS was providing taxpayer information to DOJ, for DOJ to include in a master database of its own of information from across the federal government. Do you guys remember that I've always maintained that the whole thing about Elon Musk and DOJ was the following? It wasn't really to access, per se, your banking information so it could go and empty out your bank accounts, right, and leave you poor. Although really, the goal is to make you poor, right, with this administration. That really wasn't it. It was the data. It was the data farming, all right. You know, this idea that they were going to be collecting all this information and data. Why? Because you can weaponize that information in ways that are incredibly powerful. Gives you insight into how people think, how they're going to vote, right? King-making in terms of getting people elected into office, a la who? Elon Musk. So think about that, right? So all of this data sharing is happening of all this confidential information, and the judge is like, yeah, not going to happen on my watch because it's not legal. So here's the thing. This is how the process kind of went, right? So these immigration officials would go to the IRS, and the immigration officials would have names, addresses, and other identifying information for individuals that they wish to detain and deport. The IRS would then cross-check that data in those details against their confidential tax databases to confirm not only the individual's identities, but also their location. Why? Because it's almost like, here's GPS to help you, ICE, find these people. It's like a geo-lock on where these people are located. Why? Because they just filed tax returns with the IRS with their latest address and confidential information, right? So, ICE requested from the IRS the data for approximately 1.3 million people. The IRS took that list of 1.3 million people, ran it against their database, and came back with a list of 47,000 people. And those 47,000 people, they turned that list over to ICE. And then ICE used that information. Let's talk about the amount of money, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, that's implicated by undocumented immigrants that are paying taxes into our federal government. According to the Yale Budget Lab, in 2023, undocumented immigrant workers paid $66 billion. $66 billion in federal taxes, with roughly $43 billion of that $66 billion going in the form of payroll taxes to fund Social Security and Medicare, which is for whom? For all Americans, not just immigrants. So undocumented immigrants, even though they themselves cannot participate in Social Security or Medicare because they're not citizens, right? They're undocumented. They have been paying $66 billion into our federal government. Okay? Wild. So here's the thing. Undocumented taxpayers, they don't have Social Security numbers. We just talked about it, right? They don't get to, they're paying into our Social Security, but they don't actually get to benefit from it, right? So undocumented taxpayers, they get something called an Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, an ITIN, right? The IRS says, we're going to give you this Individual Taxpayer Identification Number because we're not going to give you a Social Security number. With that ITIN, that ITIN, that is what you're going to use to file your taxes. That's what we're going to use to identify you in our confidential, or should be confidential, taxpayer database system. And like shooting fish in the barrel for the Trump regime, the IRS handed it up to ICE, right? To the tune of 47,000 people. And if you think about this policy is the dumbest shit that you could possibly think about. You're not only shooting yourself in the foot when it comes to, pooping all over $66 billion, but you're disincentivizing people for voluntarily paying their taxes when they're undocumented, right? It's like, or maybe you're not even undocumented, but now you're terrified because you're like, oh my God, if I pay into the system and now they have all this information, what if they share it? And then my name has a similar surname to someone else like Lopez or something else. And the next thing you know is they're showing up at my door and they're banging down my door. So you want people to pay their taxes, and you otherwise used to reassure them that their information would remain confidential. But now you're basically telling them, I'm going to politicize your confidential information because Trump wants me to do it, and I'm going to give it over to ICE. So Judge Colleen Kohler-Kotelly said, we're not doing this, and she entered the injunction. And I want to talk about Judge Kohler-Kotelly for just a second because she's a badass. Did you know she used to be the presiding judge over the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the FISA court, the one that deals with all the foreign intelligence surveillance that happens. She did that from 2002 to 2009. And she was nominated by former President Bill Clinton to the federal district court bench in 1997, and she served until 2023. And then in 2023, she took senior judge status, and she's still ruling on cases. You know what else she just did in April of this year in 2025? In a 120-page ruling, Judge Kohler-Kotelly blocked part of Trump's executive order that would have required people to prove their U.S. citizenship before being able to register to vote. In that 120-page ruling, she held that the states in Congress, not Donald Trump, but the states in Congress, they're the ones that have the power to regulate elections. The judge found that the IRS violated not only the federal law when it comes to the IRS code 6103, but that it also violated the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA, by reversing that long-standing policy of not sharing data with immigration authorities. So the federal government requires that all individuals who earn above $14,600 in 2024, for example, that's a threshold income level, you're required to file a federal tax return. If you don't, you get in trouble, right? And so undocumented immigrants are also included in that group of people that are required to file federal income tax returns. And so, again, when you're weaponizing somebody's ITIN, their individual taxpayer identification number, to be able to facilitate deportation, you're sending a very clear message to these taxpayers. You're saying, pay your taxes, and then we're going to help ICE hunt you down. I mean, it's pretty much like a betrayal of why you would trust this system to be able to help you, right? Like, why would you even want to continue to be a part of this system if that's what they're going to be doing to you? And lest you think it's just the IRS, no. Medicaid records are also a part of a big lawsuit that was brought by California Attorney General Rob Bonta and 19 other state attorneys general, because the Trump administration has been doing mass data transfers of Medicaid data to DHS to give confidential health information, including immigration status. So they're weaponizing and leveraging confidential data to facilitate a political agenda for Donald Trump. Talk about operating in bad faith. Folks, this is quintessential Trump regime 101. It is taking things that should be held sacred, things that should be held with respect, looking at people that are doing things like paying their freaking taxes, even though they themselves do not get to benefit from certain federal programs. And you're making them pay the taxes, and then you're saying, we're going to help hunt you down, round you up, and deport your ass. I mean, I don't know what the federal government is doing, complaining about budget deficits that they cannot make up for in certain policies and programs, and bitching and complaining, the Republicans complaining and bitching about not having money, and yet $66 billion sounds like a lot of fucking money to me. But I guess because it comes from undocumented immigrants, suddenly that's not the same green that was supposed to be the green of a dollar bill, because a dollar is a dollar, people. Exhausting, isn't it? But this is one of those instances I had to share this information with you on the channel, because these are one of these things that really should make you mad. Be mad and be outraged about this and demand accountability, because this is the type of shit that does not make America great. I'll see you on the other side. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.